Mr. Buchanan, 1 minute.
All right, no one's got to tell me how bad it was up here in New Hampshire in 1991 and 92 because I came up here to protest the economic policies of my own administration, which were responsible for what was going on here. And I know how it was because I went through Laconia. There weren't houses for sale. They had auction signs in front of houses all the way up to the North Country. I remember being in a cafeteria in Nashua, and a woman came up to me and smiled and said, "Pat, I'm going to vote for you." Then she broke down crying, and she said, "I'm losing my job and they're taking my children. What am I going to do?" So there are economic problems then, and there are problems now, but the new problems are different. And let me tell you what they are. It is the economic insecurity of the middle class and the falling wages of working class Americans. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why my colleagues will not recognize that when you cut trade deals that force Americans to compete with people making $1 an hour and 25 cents an hour in China and 75 cents an hour in Singapore, wages are going to go down, and they're going down. And for heaven's sakes, stand with me and do something to put a stop to it and end what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. Senator Dole.
Well, we shouldn't play on people's fears. We ought to play on their hopes and their aspirations. And I, too, remember what it was like up here, and remember how much it's increased despite Bill Clinton, despite the biggest tax increase in the history of America, $265 billion, despite vetoing welfare reform and tax credits for families with children and a balanced budget. But in the interim now, there are about 600,000 people working in New Hampshire. There's been a growth in that, about 51,000 over the past few years. So they made a lot of progress. The unemployment rate's about 3.3%. We've got about 1,000 companies in New Hampshire who export. They couldn't do that if you had Pat Buchanan's theory, build a wall around America, you couldn't export anything. There are people like Cabletron, Polyback, Lockheed, creates about 35,000 jobs in New Hampshire. So all this high-tech, all these things happening in New Hampshire and New England are on the plus side, and New Hampshire's on the move primarily because of an outstanding governor and the legislature working together, not because of Bill Clinton, because he, again, was an impediment.
Thank you very much, Senator. Jack will ask the next question, and the first person to answer will be Senator Lugar.
Senator, perhaps more than any other single issue, the people watching you tonight at home, I don't want to speak for them, but I think if they're, well, I had one concern, it would be if they lose their job tomorrow, what are their chances of getting as good, if not a better job the next day? And as this economy changes worldwide and in New Hampshire, and companies have to adapt, and we see all these mergers going on, many New Hampshire companies are benefiting from expanding global markets, worldwide exporting. Some of you support the NAFTA and trade agreements such as GATT. Some of you do not. Please for me answer where you stand on NAFTA and GATT and how companies can grow. And if you're for it, explain why. If you're against it, why, as to what pertains to New Hampshire companies and jobs.
I strongly favor NAFTA and GATT. I strongly favor any opportunity to knock down export barriers, because that is the primary way we will gain new jobs in our country and the primary way we are gaining new jobs now. The facts are very clear that American strength diplomatically and politically and militarily has got to be combined with our strength economically to knock down those barriers. Now, make no mistake about it, there has been a net gain in jobs in our country, a net gain in income. There have been specific losses in some industries, and specific jobs have been lost here in New Hampshire, as well as in my home state of Indiana. But we have got to take a look at the future of our country in terms of all of us. And that means we are low-cost producers again and again. We are the most ingenious people in the world. Where we have free competition, we will succeed. If we are not powerful economically and militarily, and we do not have a strong foreign policy, we will not succeed. We will lose jobs if we go protectionist and isolationist. We will gain jobs if we take leadership in the world. As a businessman, I exported. I created jobs. I know how to do it. And I speak to small business very strongly in this country, and to farmers who this year exported more pork than we imported for the first time in 43 years. Why? Because we battered down the doors, and GATT and NAFTA did the job for farmers, for meat packers, for those who wanted more jobs.
Thank you. I favor the trade agreements, and let me tell you how I learned my lesson. I became governor of one of the poorest states. We had to get our family incomes up. The way we did it was to join the world. We recruited international investment, and we got busy selling our soybeans and our cotton and our corn and our Jack Daniels and our country music. And now we're ready to sell our Saturn cars around the world. Of course we were losing jobs, but I found out very early that if all I did was fly down to Memphis and get in the newspaper trying to persuade International Harvester not to close, they were going to close anyway, and I wasn't going to be much of a governor. So I kept my focus on the job spigot, not the job drain. We also need a president who's prepared to say to Japan, for example, that if we're ready to sell our Saturns in Tokyo, the ones that are made in Tennessee, then you'd better let us run around in your market, just like we let your Toyota sellers run around in our market. But we can never raise our standard of living by protectionism, by building a wall around the country. That's not putting America first. That's putting America last. That's a lack of confidence. That's not a rising, shining America. We need lower taxes. We need less regulations. We need a focus on university research for technology. We need better schools. That's the way to have the kind of future that we need.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Buchanan, you have 1 minute for rebuttal.
All right, sure, NAFTA was really a wonderful deal for America. 2 years after we negotiated and signed it, our trade surplus is gone. We got a $15 billion trade deficit with Mexico. 300,000 jobs have gone south. The Florida winter tomato industry is on its back. Illegal immigration is soaring into this country. Mexico is the prime source of narcotics and drugs. And my good friend Senator Dole negotiated a $50 billion bailout with Bill Clinton for the regime that brought this all about. Why? Because Mexico needed the money to pay back Citibank, Chase Manhattan, and Goldman Sachs. Now, I plead guilty, Bob, to wanting to protect American workers making $10 an hour in South Carolina textile mills from having to compete with Mexicans making $1 an hour. That's just not fair. That is un-American. But Bob, when Citibank, Chase Manhattan, and Goldman Sachs got into trouble, you turned into a protectionist with Bill Clinton and Mr. Rubin, Mr. Greenspan, and all of you got together and bailed out that government. Why didn't you let those fellas test the magic of the marketplace like you want American workers to do?
Thank you. Senator Dole, you have a minute.
Let me say, first of all, the problem is not with NAFTA and GATT. I supported the problem with President Clinton. He's been less than aggressive in effect to be an aggressive trade policy. He's got anti-dumping provisions, anti-subsidy provisions. We have provisions in law called Section 301 where he can take action to protect American workers. He hasn't done it. He hasn't done it time after time after time. As far as the Mexican bailout is concerned, and of course this is a position, Pat Buchanan was a free trader not too many years ago, used to write about it, used to read his columns, but he's changed his mind. We ship about $3 billion in exports per month to Mexico. Creates a lot of jobs in America. Now, if we didn't have the Mexican, so-called Mexican bailout was recommended by the chairman of the Fed, Alan Greenspan, and others, because had we not done that, there would have been millions and millions of Mexicans coming across the border, would increased our costs for health care, education, and everything else. You talk about an illegal immigration flood, this would have been a flood. It's going to steady off. It's going to give it a little time to work. But if I'm the President of the United States, I'll use the weapons Congress gave me to make certain we get a fair deal in Mexico and the European countries.
Mr. Forbes.
It is essential for America to work to reduce trade barriers. We are now the most competitive nation in the world. We tried high tariffs in the past. We tried isolationism in the past, and we got a Great Depression as a result. America, because it's competitive, must not only reduce trade barriers with their neighbors, but with countries like Japan as well. The problem with NAFTA, which I supported, was not reducing trade barriers. It was the fact that the Clinton administration and the Mexican government neither have lived up to the spirit of that agreement. They put in a massive devaluation a little over a year ago with the express purpose of making it harder for our products to enter Mexico and easier for Mexican products to enter into the United States. That is wrong. That is not free trade. Because America is competitive, when I'm president, we're going to start trade negotiations with countries like Japan for a free trade agreement. Everyone says, gee, that's not possible. Well, it took 5 years, 6 years to do one in Canada, may take 10 or 12 years in Japan. But when we reduce these barriers, America creates jobs and high-paying jobs.
Let me give my answer here. Bob said all these illegal aliens are going to come across our border. They wouldn't come across the border if Pat Buchanan were President of the United States. I would have a security fence across all those areas of mass transit into this country. We would stop illegal immigration cold. because that is a constitutional duty of the President of the United States, to protect the borders of America and the states of America from foreign invasion. And that's what's taken place when 1, 2, 3 million people walk across our borders every year, some of them going into crime, some of them going on welfare, most of them coming for work. Our immigration laws are being violated, and neither the Congress of the United States or the President of the United States are faithfully executing the laws of the United States. And when we get there, they will be faithfully executed, and illegal immigration into this country from that southern border will be stopped cold. You have my word.
Mr. Buchanan,
Now, I know you're on that commission. You
Yeah.
raised Social Security taxes more than any tax increase in
That's
American
right,
history.
but we saved Social Security. 37 million Americans are getting their checks every month. But Pat's off on this isolationist kick. Build a fence around America. Now, let's face it. The thing we got to do in Mexico, get this NAFTA thing, we're get a good, strong president, use the weapons Congress gave him, improve the economy in Mexico. Those people will stay home. If they don't, we do have a responsibility. Bob Dole will have that responsibility in 1997. And if not, we ought to supplement or compensate the states who have to pick up the slack on Medicaid, health care, and other education, other costs they incur because of illegals.
thank you, Senator.